Layla Davis stepped onto the plane with a gentle smile on her face and an unmistakable sense of pride. The first-class ticket in her hand was a well-deserved reward after years of relentless effort. But that happiness was fleeting. A cold, judgmental gaze, followed by a harsh voice, shattered what should have been the best moment of her day. Layla was asked to leave her seat, not because her ticket was invalid, but because of an invisible bias that loomed over her. Under the sympathetic glances and curious whispers of other passengers, Layla quietly stood up, her head held high, though her heart ached. Someone else might have been defeated, but not her. In that moment, when others thought she had been conquered, Layla was silently preparing for an action that would change everything, not just for herself, but for countless others who had never been truly seen or respected. Layla Davis, a woman with a gentle exterior but a strong inner resolve, gracefully walked through the narrow aisle of the airplane. Her polished attire and small leather bag in hand gave her an air of both elegance and humility. Her eyes lit up with joy as she found her seat, a first-class spot she had long dreamed of. Carefully, she placed her bag in the overhead compartment, her gaze briefly glancing at the other passengers around her. A few curious eyes followed her, but Layla paid no attention. This was her moment, a small chance to savor the fruits of her hard work after countless long days. Yet, that sense of peace did not last long. Amid the soft hum of the cabin, the cold voice of Charlotte Hayes, a flight attendant, broke the tranquility, shattering the calm atmosphere. "Excuse me, may I see your ticket?" Layla looked up, her eyes showing a hint of surprise, but her composure remained intact. "Of course, here it is," she replied calmly, handing over her ticket. Charlotte glanced at the ticket, her gaze filled with skepticism. A faint smirk appeared on her face. "First class, huh?" Charlotte emphasized, her tone dripping with doubt. "It seems there might have been a mistake." Those words felt like an invisible punch, but Layla maintained her confident demeanor. "There is no mistake," she said, her tone steady but firm. "I booked this ticket weeks ago." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her smile now carrying a distinct air of mockery. "I'm afraid you'll have to move to the economy class. I don't think this seat suits you." Charlotte's words rang out clearly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. A few began whispering, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and pity directed at Layla. She could feel every look piercing into her, like 1,000 needles pricking her heart. Layla stood up, taking a deep breath, suppressing the wave of humiliation rising within her. She held her head high, though a flicker of pain was visible in her eyes. "If you're certain that's the rule, I will comply," she said, each word carefully measured. Charlotte smiled triumphantly as Layla quietly gathered her belongings. The murmurs around them grew louder. Layla made her way to the economy class, gripping her handbag tightly. She sat down in the cramped seat between two strangers, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, white clouds floated lazily by, but inside her, a storm of emotions raged. Silently, Layla pulled out her phone and sent a short, concise message. "I need assistance. Be ready. I'll signal you." Her expression remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly as she placed the phone down. Sitting up straight, her eyes focused ahead, she kept reminding herself, "Patience is my greatest strength. They'll soon realize I'm not just an ordinary passenger." Layla remained seated in economy, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, her eyes staring out of the small window. Outside, the drifting clouds seemed to mock the calmness she was trying to project. Yet, deep within her mind, plans were forming, each detail meticulously falling into place. In the cabin, a few passengers glanced at Layla with pity. A middle-aged woman shook her head slightly as if to say, "Why would they do that to her?" Nearby, a child whispered to his mother, "Mom, why isn't she allowed to sit in her seat?" The mother remained silent, her expression briefly showing confusion. Layla heard everything, but her face betrayed no emotion. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across her lips. Her silence wasn't a sign of defeat, but one of quiet anticipation. When everything seemed weighed down by the oppressive atmosphere, a gentle voice spoke beside Layla. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Layla turned to see a young flight attendant with a kind face and genuinely caring eyes. This was Sophia Allen, the only person on this flight seemingly untouched by prejudice. "I'm fine," Layla replied, her voice calm as ever. "Just a small misunderstanding, I suppose." Sophia placed a glass of water on the tray table in front of Layla, her gaze lingering for a few seconds, as if wanting to say more but unsure of how to begin. "If you need anything, just let me know," Sophia said softly before turning away. That small act of kindness was like a fragile ray of light cutting through the thick darkness. For Layla, it was enough to remind her that not everyone on this flight shared Charlotte's prejudices. Layla picked up her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Another message was sent, brief yet meaningful. "Prepare to intervene when the plane lands. Make sure I'm directly connected to the highest authority." She tucked her phone back into her bag, her gaze briefly sweeping over the rows of seats ahead, where Charlotte was still moving between passengers. Charlotte's demeanor had shifted. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced with visible tension. She could sense that Layla wasn't someone who could be easily subdued. Layla gently leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes closing softly. Yet, in her mind, every step of her plan was being carefully laid out with precision. Up front, Charlotte began to feel uneasy as her colleague, Michael Turner, started asking pointed questions. "What happened with the first-class passenger?" Michael asked, his tone calm, but his gaze sharp. "It was just a small misunderstanding," Charlotte replied, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Michael frowned, his eyes briefly glancing toward the row where Layla was seated. He said nothing more, but the silence itself felt like a warning. Charlotte could sense that her grip on the situation was slipping away. The remaining moments of the flight passed in tense silence. Charlotte walked past Layla several times, her eyes avoiding direct contact, never daring to meet her gaze. Layla, in contrast, remained serene, like a calm surface of water before a storm. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. In her mind, one thought echoed clearly. Just a little longer, and everything will be resolved, not just for me, but for everyone like me. As the plane began its descent, the silence in the cabin felt heavier than ever. Passengers around were preparing for landing, but within the minds of both Layla and Charlotte, a storm of emotions was brewing. When the familiar ding of the announcement system rang out, Charlotte flinched. A colleague handed her a phone from the main cabin, whispering, "They want to speak with you. It's from the executive office." Charlotte felt her breath catch. She hesitated for a moment before lifting the phone to her ear. "Charlotte Hayes, flight attendant on Flight 287, she said, her voice now devoid of its usual confidence. The voice on the other end was authoritative, yet calm. "Ms. Hayes, we have received a direct complaint regarding an incident on this flight. Upon landing, you will need to provide a detailed report. For the remainder of the flight, we ask that you treat all passengers with absolute respect." Charlotte gripped the phone tightly, feeling as if all eyes in the cabin were now on her, especially Layla's. Layla sat upright, her gaze locked firmly on Charlotte as she walked by. Not a single word was spoken, but the look in Layla's eyes said it all. "I know, and I'm waiting." Charlotte deliberately avoided Layla's gaze, but her steps became slower and more hesitant. Any sense of control she once had was now completely gone. In the back, passengers began sensing that something was off. A man leaned over to his wife and whispered, "Do you feel like there's something strange about this flight?" The woman nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on Layla, whose calm yet authoritative demeanor stood out. When the plane touched down on the runway, Layla exhaled softly, as if she had completed the first phase of her plan. In stark contrast, Charlotte felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. As soon as the announcement, "Passengers may now remove their seatbelts," finished, Charlotte was summoned through the intercom by the captain. "Charlotte, please report to the flight attendant station immediately." Charlotte felt like every eye in the cabin was on her as she hurriedly made her way forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. Meanwhile, Layla stood up, calmly retrieving her belongings. Unlike Charlotte's frantic demeanor, every movement Layla made was deliberate, as if she knew exactly what was coming next. At the plane's exit, a group of uniformed personnel, including 2 representatives from the executive office and a security officer, were waiting. As Layla disembarked, their eyes met hers with clear respect. Charlotte appeared shortly after, her face pale. One of the executive officers spoke, their tone sharp but polite. "Ms. Hayes, we need you to come with us and provide a report immediately." Charlotte tried to force a weak smile, but it quickly faded when she saw Layla standing beside her, calmly observing. "We also need to speak with you, Ms. Davis." The executive turned to Layla, their tone entirely different, full of respect and professionalism. Charlotte felt the weight of every gaze bearing down on her as she followed the executive staff. She glanced at Layla briefly, but couldn't meet the eyes of the woman she had so wrongly judged. Layla walked slowly, each step a quiet affirmation that she had never lost control. Within her, a sense of relief began to rise, though she knew this was only the beginning. "Injustice must be addressed," she thought, her eyes fixed ahead. "And I'll make sure it is." The air outside the cabin felt crisp and cold as Layla stepped through the plane's door, her stride slow but steady. Her composure remained intact, though in her eyes, complex emotions swirled like waves beneath a calm surface. In a small corner of the airport, Charlotte sat silently in a temporary meeting room designated by the airline. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to stretch each second, amplifying the fear and dread that filled her heart. Layla was escorted to another room, where a group of executives awaited her. Before stepping inside, she paused, taking a deep breath. She knew this moment wasn't just about herself, but about everyone who had ever been unfairly judged due to prejudice. The door opened, and Jonathan Wells, the airline's CEO, stood up. He walked over to greet her, offering a polite handshake, though his demeanor betrayed a hint of unease. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Ms. Davis," Jonathan began, his tone cautious. Layla nodded slightly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I hope that what I share today will help make your airline better," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. Layla began recounting the entire incident on the flight. She added no embellishments, no exaggerations, just the simple truth. Yet, the measured calmness in her voice carried a weight more impactful than any accusation. Everyone in the room listened intently. Jonathan's expression gradually shifted from tension to a touch of shame. He realized that what had happened was not just a personal failure, but a reflection of deeper flaws within the system. "We deeply apologize for this experience, Ms. Davis," Jonathan said, his gaze earnest. "I assure you, the airline will thoroughly investigate and address this matter." Layla paused briefly, her eyes reflecting a moment of thought before she replied, "I don't need empty apologies, Mr. Wells. I want to see action." Meanwhile, in the adjacent temporary meeting room, Charlotte was being questioned by other executives. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as pointed questions forced her to confront the truth. "What was your reasoning for moving a passenger with a valid ticket to economy class?" one director asked, his tone stern. Charlotte bit her lip, lowering her head. She attempted to defend herself. I didn't think she belonged in first class." A long silence filled the room. The cold, unyielding stares of the executives made it clear her answer was unacceptable. "Didn't belong?" A voice finally rang out, firm and resolute. "Ms. Hayes, this is not about seating. This is about your bias. Charlotte felt everything within her crumble. She had no further justification to offer. Layla stepped out of the meeting room, feeling a sense of relief, but as she caught sight of Charlotte, she stopped. Charlotte looked up, her eyes filled with regret. Layla stood there for a few moments, then said just one sentence, enough for Charlotte to remember forever. I hope you've learned something from this. It wasn't a scolding, nor was it revenge. It was a gentle reminder, but its weight pressed heavily on Charlotte's heart. As Layla left the airport, a new sense of lightness sparked within her. This was not just a personal victory. It was a step forward for justice and respect. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat silently in an empty room, knowing her career was now on the line. But what haunted her most wasn't the consequences. It was the look in Layla's eyes. Those eyes bore no hatred, only unyielding determination and quiet compassion. The shuttle carrying Layla out of the airport glided along the cobblestone road leading to the parking area. Inside, she sat quietly, her gaze distant through the window. Her heart, though still touched by lingering waves of emotion, was now filled with relief. What she had done today wasn't just for herself. It was for those who had never been given the chance to voice the injustices they endured. At the executive office, the atmosphere was more serious than ever. Jonathan Wells, along with the board members, held an urgent meeting to discuss the incident. We cannot let something like this happen again. This isn't just a personal issue. It's a wake-up call about how we operate, Jonathan said firmly. The other leaders nodded, agreement spreading across the room. We will organize mandatory training on awareness and bias for all employees, starting next week, one member proposed. And we need to issue a public apology to Ms. Davis. She deserves recognition for helping us identify this issue, Jonathan emphasized. Meanwhile, in a smaller meeting room, Sophia Allen, the flight attendant who had shown kindness to Layla, received a call from management. When she entered the room, Jonathan Wells was waiting for her. Sophia, you demonstrated the professionalism and compassion that our airline strives for. We want to thank you and offer you the position of supervising the flight attendant team, Jonathan said, his eyes filled with gratitude. Sophia was taken by surprise, but then a proud smile spread across her face. Thank you, sir, but it's all because I believe every passenger deserves to be treated with fairness, she replied humbly, her tone both modest and inspiring. Charlotte Hayes was not as fortunate as Sophia. Sitting in a silent room, she received the official notification: suspension pending investigation. Ms. Hayes, this isn't just about your actions toward Ms. Davis, but also about other inappropriate behavior we've observed in the past, a board member stated, his gaze stern and unforgiving. Charlotte lowered her head, shame and regret engulfing her. In her mind, the image of Layla's calm yet piercing eyes played over and over, refusing to fade. A few days later, Jonathan Wells sent an official letter to Layla, along with the airline's public apology. In the letter, he wrote, "We thank you for helping us recognize the flaws in our system. Your actions were not just a response to injustice, but a profound lesson for us all." Layla read the letter in her small apartment, a faint smile appearing on her lips. She knew she had planted the seeds for a change far greater than herself. Layla returned to her daily life and work, but her story had spread far and wide. Articles and shared accounts of her journey became a symbol of patience and determination. Sophia, in her new role, worked tirelessly to create a fairer and more professional work environment. As for Charlotte, though suspended, she began a different journey, facing herself and confronting the biases she had once held. Layla sat by her window, gazing at the star-filled night sky. She whispered softly, "Everything starts with small changes, and I believe they will grow, like the light from these stars." A new day began at the airline's executive office, but the atmosphere was now different. The changes initiated by Layla Davis were gradually taking shape, bringing hope to both passengers and employees alike. Sophia Allen, now a supervisor, stood before a group of flight attendants attending a training session on awareness and overcoming bias. She began her address with Layla's story. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she argue. She simply remained patient and let the truth speak for itself. That's why we're here today, to ensure that no one else has to go through something like this again. All eyes were fixed on Sophia, feeling the weight of her words. Some nodded, others stayed silent, but everyone understood this was the right path forward. Meanwhile, Charlotte Hayes, no longer a flight attendant, sat quietly in her small apartment. She picked up a letter she had written and rewritten many times but finally decided to send it. In her letter to Layla, Charlotte wrote, "I was wrong. Wrong in my perception. Wrong in the biases I didn't even realize I carried. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that your story has changed me. Thank you for not only staying calm, but for bringing light to those who needed it." A few days later, Layla received the letter. She read it in silence, a warm feeling spreading through her. She didn't reply, but she knew that this small act was Charlotte's first step toward change. The airline decided to do something unprecedented, to honor Layla Davis as a symbol of fairness. A small photograph of her was placed in the executive office with the words, "We never stop learning from our passengers. Thank you for helping us become better." Layla smiled as she was invited to attend the ceremony. Her speech was brief, yet her words left a lasting impression. "I didn't do this to be honored. I simply want everyone to remember that a small act of patience can change an entire system." Layla Davis's story isn't just about one flight. It's about a greater journey. A journey to reclaim justice, challenge prejudice, and bring about positive change. She refused to let injustice diminish her dignity, instead using patience and intellect to illuminate an entire system. Remember, any one of us can be like Layla. It only takes a little courage, a bit of determination, and a belief that we can make a difference. If this story has touched your heart, share it with those around you. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to spread more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for being with us today.